The marriage covenant. Marriage is more than just a relationship or a very important union. Marriage is a covenant relationship. Welcome to a Grace Digital presentation. In this video, we will cover the true meaning of a covenant. The covenant of marriage. In today's age, we do not realize the spiritual aspects of covenants. People today have failed to understand the true nature of covenants. Some individuals may think that marriage is merely cohabiting with someone. Again, this is a very false perception, as marriage goes way beyond that. The God we serve is a God of covenants. All through scriptures, we see God in covenant relationships with different people. For example, in Genesis chapter 17, God cut a covenant with Abraham. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. Genesis 17, verse 2. Although this covenant was made a long time ago, and Abraham died thousands of years ago, the covenant that God made with him then is still in effect today. It is interesting that we, as the redeemed, are still proud beneficiaries of the Abrahamic covenant, even though we never met him physically. When God entered into the covenant with Abraham, there were several notable events that took place. Among those events are the changing of Abram's and Sarai's names to Abraham, which means a prince of God, and Sarah, which means a princess of God. In other words, God introduced Abraham into the royal family before he cut the covenant with him. The Abrahamic covenant remains the most astounding record in existence and remains the basis of Judaism and Christianity. This covenant God cut with Abraham was sealed in blood, and the sign was the circumcision of every male child. God again cut a covenant with Noah in Genesis chapter 8. And Noah built an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled the sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. Verses 20 to 21 of chapter 8. And in chapter 9, God establishes the covenant. And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you. After which God put the rainbow in the sky as a sign of the immutability of the covenant. God also kept cutting covenants with his people until Jesus, the only begotten Son of the Father, who came to enact a new covenant testament in his blood. The silence of the disciples when Jesus introduced the covenant also reveals that they understood the meaning of a covenant, unlike the people today. Jesus said, This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many unto the remission of sins. And then told them to eat the bread, which is his body, and to drink the wine, which he declared his blood, as we see in Luke 22, verse 20. In the Bible, covenants are agreements or accords between God and man. So what is a covenant? A covenant is a bond. It is also a formal sealed agreement or contract with witnesses. Blood covenants were the basis of all primitive religions. Although most of these were corrupt and vile, it had the marks of an original revelation from God. A covenant is very different from a promise. While a promise is a declaration assuring that one will or will not do something, there are no conditions attached to promises, unlike the covenant. The covenant of marriage is two-sided. The covenant is both horizontal and vertical. The marriage covenant is horizontal because the covenant is between man and his wife. Both of them must understand and obey the terms of the covenant. The marriage covenant is also vertical because it is between God and man. God's side of the covenant is abiding and settled. God is not more faithful in one marriage than another marriage. Acts 10 verse 34 says, "He's no respecter of persons. What he does for one, he'll do for another." Many individuals get into marriage without understanding that it is a covenant. The marriage covenant is only valid when you are legally joined. And because it is a covenant, you're expected to keep it and not break it. We are made in the image of God, and God is faithful to his covenants. He never breaks them. In Psalm 89 verse 34, God says, "My covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that is gone out of my lips." So now let's talk about the characteristics of the marriage covenant. Number 1, it is written. A marriage covenant is a formal declaration or commitment, usually written having witnesses. There is the need for you to put your commitment down in writing by having a marriage certificate, which makes it legally binding. You do not have to yield to pressures from anyone unless your union is finally written. Having a boyfriend or courtship is no exchange for the marriage covenant. Number 2, it should not be broken. The marriage covenant should not be broken. Our God is a covenant keeper, not a covenant breaker. My covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that is gone out of my lips. Psalm 89, verse 24. Therefore, as his children, a husband and wife should abide by the covenant and not break the covenant. A significant characteristic of the marriage covenant is that it is meant to be for life. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 39 says, "The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord." Divorce is not a pleasant experience, and only those that have gone through it can tell the experience. It is like a marital amputation. You have to do all within your power to avoid it. Even though God is a God of second chances, it is better to avoid divorce than to experience it. It is like two pieces of glued paper that are forcefully detached. The glue may remain excellent, but both partners become casualties. You must agree within yourself that there are no alternatives or options. By entering into the covenant of marriage, you have burnt all the bridges behind you. This elementary understanding will help you settle down and make your home an exciting place. The Bible also warns us, "Therefore, take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth." Malachi 2 verse 15. Treacherous here means to be deceptive or deceitful. Therefore, God is saying, don't deal deceptively with your wife or husband. In some marriages, the man plans perversity against the woman, and she in turn looks for ways of robbing and cheating him. But this is not right, because whatever you do against your spouse indirectly affects you. Some people betray their partners to their friends and extended families. A traitor is the same as a treacherous. Number 3. Exchange of gifts. Another feature in a marriage is exchange of gifts. We see an example of this in the covenant between God and Abraham. God asked Abraham for Isaac, and Abraham did not think twice about it. He was ready to give God his all. Abraham knew he was in a covenant relationship with the Almighty God, and as such didn't want to break it. And because the covenant involves the exchange of gifts, he was willing to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, as seen in Genesis 22. When two people in a covenant of marriage, they ought to be committed to one another. It is, however, unfortunate to see couples hiding money away from each other. Some hide how much money they earn and the property they have from their partner. These acts reveal that they do not understand this essential characteristic of a marriage covenant. Once married, what a couple has now jointly belongs to them. Don't allow earthly things to come between you and your spouse. If you don't want shame, you must share your secrets with your spouse. Sharing in a marriage is so important. Number 4. It has a seal. A covenant is usually sealed with blood as a sign. Noah made a covenant with God in Genesis 8, verse 20, and offered burnt offerings unto him. God on his part also set a bow as a token of the covenant. Genesis 9, verse 13. In Genesis 17, we see the seal of Abraham's covenant with God was a circumcision of everyone that was a male child. And ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. Genesis 17, verse 11. Jesus also shed his blood on the cross of Calvary as a sign of the covenant of salvation. Hebrews 8, verse 6 says, But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry. But how much also he is a mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. Just as every covenant has a seal, the marriage covenant has a seal. The seal of a marriage covenant is sexual intercourse. During the first meeting between the husband and wife in a marriage involves the shedding of blood, and no matter how little. After this, subsequent sexual relationships between the wife and husband is the token of a marriage covenant. So, in order not to break the covenant, never get involved in a sexual relationship with anyone apart from your spouse. Sexual immorality is dangerous. Men and women in a marriage covenant are expected to apply the above characteristics in order to have a home that will last and be the haven it was created to be. We are beginning a new in-depth series on marriage to ensure that you all have successful marriages, even if you haven't been raised in one or surrounded by one. If you'd like us to continue the series, put it down in the comments.